The NU Viability Rankings thread has an update once again, and look, I'm even the one that made the update post. Your boy's back in his prime. So of course, today we're going to be talking about the update. A lot of things have changed, and I for one believe that the end result of the V are starting to look a lot better, especially near the top end. Probably still could fix the fact that B rank and B minus rank have like a bajillion Pokemon in it, and C has 2. But for now, we don't really care. I'm just gonna get into this update post, give you all my thoughts on why things moved around. Now, of course, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, I'm gonna need y'all to go down there and fix that. I'm getting very close to 9,000 subs, and of course, the end of the year goal is 10,000. Let's just get me there, man. Just get me there and join as a member too. I have some very interesting ideas for some member type videos. Not even like member exclusive, just members get to collaborate in a certain way. So, hey, you interested in learning about that? You're gonna need you to join. Now, new additions to the VR. Bombardier thrown into C rank. I think a big part of it is just how I put here. It is like Incineroar, a dark type that can pivot. The nice benefit it has over Incineroar though is of course access to Roost, and marginally a little less weak to knockoff, since instead of being a grounded fire type, it's a flying type. So even if you lose your boots, yeah, sure, you take rocks damage, but you're immune to T-Spike and you're immune to regular Spike, so that is pretty big. Roost helps overall with longevity, and it is kind of interesting as a mon with rocks, because it lets you run alternatives like Earthworm, and you don't have to throw rocks on it. You could just be Spike. Or you could go Bronzong, and maybe you want to run the pure setup sweeper set. You could run, like, Registeel with the demons. I don't know, just giving y'all some ideas. And one of the things as well, and it's something I've emphasized a lot in recent videos too, dark types are just really, really, really mandatory on teams, it feels like. It's not even that this one beats Cress, right? It's just that it helps give you some room around Cress. It helps check Monkey Dory, Chandelure, Hisui Typhlosion, even Bronzong. Like, having knockoff in this metagame is so huge, especially if you're able to force spikes onto your team. We've been over it a lot. Hazard control in the tier is not amazing. It's not that it's bad, it's just not as good as maybe we'd like it to be. And so, having another mon that can help support those spikes builds that are at times feasible, very good. We see Goodra as well get put into B-. I know Phantom Mystics will tell you this mon is like A-, hard meta, just destroyer, incredible stall breaker. I'm not that sold, but it is a good progress maker with like Knock Toxic. You could run the sub acid spray set that we saw a lot from the pre-DLC meta, and having a lot of good special bulk is just nice, because if you need this mon to take a hit from one of these super strong wall breakers, it is definitely capable of doing that. And hey, as Bronzong rises as a steel type, it's nice that knockoff does super effective chip on the switch. You get super effective knock and then super effective like Fire Blast or Flamethrower, so it's pretty nice. And of course too, it's always worth mentioning that having Toxic in a metagame where clerics are completely absent is always going to be nice. And the poison types in the tier don't really switch into Goodra. I mean, we look at what like top poisons are, right? Alola Muck is probably your only one that really is a Goodra switch in. Otherwise, you've got Dory getting popped by a Drake, Glowbro getting popped by a Drake, Dragalgalauga getting popped by a Drake. You notice the pattern here. So, decent mon. Earthworm into B-. It's very much a Bronzong alternative, as I wrote here. They're ground immune steel types, meaning that they're as close to Flagon counters as you're getting. Earthworm is even better as a Flagon counter, because it's not weak to Throat Chop, which is cool. The thing that really differentiates it, though, is going to be, in my opinion, Spikes access, like we talked about with Bombardier. If you want to fit Spikes on Team Worm is not a bad option. And hey, being not weak to Dark and Ghost like Zong is, does have some cool benefits, specifically that it means you need a little less compensating in the builder. So you'll notice that a lot of the teams that I've built lately, yeah, AV Meloetta coming back, but like, I'm trying to look for a team with double Psychic. I used one like last video, right? Didn't I? Here you go. But here's what I used recently. You got Zong plus Glowbro. So like Incineroar was just mandatory. I think if you go something like Worm, you can maybe justify no dark type like naturally, and instead rely on a Terra type or just mons that can at least tank the hits okay. All that said though, cool alternative and does a lot of the same as Zong. It's just the mixed bulk not being as good has me lower on Earthworm than some others. Palma into B-, maybe a little of an overrank, maybe C is a more adequate spot for it. But I think a couple things help. One, Scarf's actually not too bad, and it is a cool alternative as a Volt Switch blocker if you want to try Volt Absorb, or you can just still run Iron Fist, of course, for the Ice Punch damage buff. Revival Blessing stuff is still, like, occasionally seen. It's not bad. It's not amazing, but definitely passable if you want to try it out. I would also say that with bulky ground types not really being seen, because, of course, again, VR, what are our ground types? Flygon. And then I'm looking, you see Pert, okay. That gets smacked around by CC, but okay. And I'm looking, like, there's really not ground types in the tier. So, makes your Double Shock really spammable, and that's only amplified by grass types being at a low point. So really cool. Funny as I talk about ground types being at a low point, we then see Palisand ranked. Only at C for now. I know some people are wanting to push it even higher. I think it could go higher up, but for now, C's fine. It's a great Toxicroak counter, and otherwise you just punish all the U-turn spammers like Flygon, Mian Xiao, even Monkey Dory. It's a okay check too, because he quad resists Sludge Wave, and of course U-turn, well, that's not doing damage to you, so there's that. Pincurchin ranked at C, just to reflect that electric terrain teams are viable. That's really all there is for it for now. At the moment, people are thinking that Grassy and Psychic Terrain are better than E-Terrain, so it's not gonna go much higher. The one thing I'll note, and you'll see this with Iron Thorns' rise later on, being able to support that mod is really cool. You also make it so it doesn't have to run booster energy. It still could if you wanted, I guess, so that you could have the booster energy outside the turn, but it's pointless. Screamtail up to B- as well from the unranked spot. We've seen it get used a little bit more in this metagame because the wish sets with Encore are honestly not too bad. You shut down Crelia really effectively, and that's one of the bigger things. And you counter Gallade, not counter Gallade, you check Gallade though defensively, and it's probably the best option for that. I mean, look at all our other mons, like even at the top, none of these really are great Gallade checks, so that's good. And we've even seen some Calm Mind Screamtail sets have marginal success on HO, so pretty cool. Aqua Tauros slammed right into B+. Eternally will stand for the Boots bulk up set till the end of time. It's a good Incineroar check. Scarf has seen some use. I like Bandit a lot. I think Choice Band with Vileplume usage at a lower point compared to previous metas, as well as, of course, Slowbro having rised a long time ago. Makes Bandit Aqua Tauros really hard to deal with. I mean, again, our fighting checks that you usually see are like Talonflame and Glowbro, and these don't really want to switch into Wave Crash. Crest doesn't want to have to take the super strong Wave Crash because, frankly, you're probably pressured by a 2-hit KO without much chip needed if you factor in Terra Water. Croak's a pretty poor check because at best you're switching into the water moves, but CC 2-shots you really easily and you're slower. And then, like I talked about, Plume is just not as common as it once was. So definitely a mon that's trending upward. I don't know if PU players would be sad if we took it, but it could happen. And then Blaze Tor was put in B-. I think I actually ended up voting it for C, but it may have been B-. Regardless, it's a good alternative still to Aqua Breed. The main advantage is that you're even better at checking Incineroar since you're immune to, like, Will-O-Wisp. Not that Willow Incineroar is super common or anything, but it's something. Really, the drawbacks are just you don't have priority moves, so that can be a little bit annoying. And you're a little more weak to hazards, I guess, because instead of resisting Stealth Rock, you take neutral from it. These aren't deal breakers, but I think generally people like the water typing more than the fire typing. Next up, Pokemon Rising. You'll notice we have fewer rises compared to drops. Good amount of drops here. Gallade up to A+. It is, I believe, undoubtedly the best breaker in the tier. And obviously it's being suspect tested for a reason, right? It's got some very absurd set versatility that obfuscates your defensive counterplay. So either Swords Dance is just blowing up everything in front of it, or sets like Agility are denying a lot of your offensive counterplay outside of priority. And even then, Gallade's seen some use on Psychic Terrain. So just think about Agility Gallade under Psy Terrain. So you have Psycho Cut getting a damage boost. You've got this now outspeeding foes like Inteleon and Talon. You've got it immune to things like Flygon's Fimp. It's really rough. And I mean, even here, I talked about SD plus Shadow Sneak, just as another method to try and dunk on some of your offensive checks, like, say, I was gonna say Monkey Dory, but it's not really a good offensive check since you can't really revenge you that well. But Hisui Typhlosion, Shandy, why not? Scarf Shandy specifically, but there you go. Talon up to A, even with Vapo at a high point. Talon can still U-turn on it repeatedly if it needs, and Toxicroak being such a phenomenal teammate makes it a pretty easy mon to exploit, and then otherwise our water immunities aren't very like common. It's like Gastrodon, and then obviously Croak could check this, but one Ice Beam and Croak is already feeling the pressure pretty significantly. A lot of time with Inteleon, it's like you're gonna need a fast mon to revenge kill it, and you're gonna need some like defensive mon that's got a good Terra type. So maybe you have like a Terra Water Bronzong, or like a Terra Dragon Alola Muck. Maybe you've got, trying to think like another defensive mon that runs Terra types for it. Terra Dragon even like on Registeel. Because otherwise, a lot of the water resistances in the tier are just kind of shaky. They're not the greatest. They're not bad. Just not the greatest. I'm also going to edit something in my post real quick. This literally is just for my sake. It doesn't actually change anything about the post. Right up to here. I literally am just doing this so that it's like all the mons rising to A right next to each other. I don't know why I bothered, but we got Monkey Dory rising up. Even with banning like several fighters, they just kind of keep replacing. Y'all remember that video where the thumbnail was like NU Fight Club or something? And it was literally just showcasing how at the time we had like 8 or something like that very viable fighting types. Well, kind of a similar situation right now where we look up here and it's like, all right, Gallade, then Breloom, then Mienshao, then Toxicroak, then Tauros Aqua, then yeah, Paldean Aqua Tauros, then Heracross, then Lee, then Infernape. They just keep coming back, and Monkey Dory supports all of them quite significantly. I mean, this one draws in Steel types and Dark types like little else could even try. And so these fighters are always going to be positioned in an incredibly advantageous way to get turns to fire off their stab moves. And also, I really like Trick Monkey Dory right now, partly because defensive setup mons are still seeing a lot of use. I think Bronzong and Crest are the two that come to mind always for me. You just throw a trick at them. They can't really do anything to you without having several boosts, which also helps. So, pretty good mon. Also, maybe the best Scarfer in the tier? Maybe. It's kind of hard for me to say that for sure. I think Scarf Flygon is not an amazing set for it right now. It's still a really good Gloomon. It's just the other sets are a little more threatening. Mienshao I don't really love as a Scarfer. Scarf Inteleon I've never been sold on, and yeah, I can actually see the argument right now. Scarf Dory is the best Scarf in the tier. Hisui Typh went up to A-. Now, I do think this is a bit of an overreach at this point. I do think that this is a bit... Maybe that this was reacting to Lucario usage, and how the benefit that you had with Hisui Typhlosion over Chandelure was that you outsped Luke. With Luke gone, I don't know if the rise is still necessary. I'll note that compared to Chandelure, you don't have to Terrastalize to have super effective coverage for Incineroar, and Eruption Spam isn't like the worst thing you have available. Of course, if you run into a Vaporeon, you just kind of slam your head into the wall and cry, but it's okay. I do think this mod has some good potential, and it fits pretty well in this heavy-duty boots reliant metagame that we see. You don't have to go choice items on this at all. It's pretty good just relying on boots. But like I said, I think maybe with Lucario around, it would be A-. Now I'm not so sure. We see Thorns finally get a rise to B+, and of course, you all will understand, I've been voting Iron Thorns into the A rank for months now. I will keep doing that too. I think Thorns is incredible. And the ban of Pokemon like, you know, Cloyster, you see banned, you see Gator banned, Lucario banned. I could go, Gyarados ban is kind of old at this point, but again, point being, lots of physical setup sweepers that were being put on these hyper offense teams non-stop are getting banned, and that just makes it even better for Thorns. It also, of course, helps that Mienshao trending down means you don't have to run Terra Fairy so often, so you can maybe go like Terra Grass and exploit a super effective Terra Blast versus Pert, or make use of that. So it's getting more options, like I wrote right here too. Electric Terrain starting to appear in the metagame is also good for it, because now I can run like leftovers on my Iron Thorns. And that's just gonna make it even more annoying to deal with. We see Kilowattrel up to B+. Some people think it's an A rank mon even. It's an incredibly hard to stop pivot. I think competitive sets are the biggest reason for Talonflame starting to run Flare Blitz. You had that some for Lucario as well. Not even Lucario, more like Breloom. I was gonna say, because Breloom was running some like Terra Steel, and it was like, okay, well, I want to have the move hit it regardless of those two Terra types. But it's also good for Kilowattrel, because you don't want this coming in on your Defogs and then just getting a free chance to break. Despite the Gastrodon Rise, make no mistake, this mon is still pretty uncommon, and that's like the only thing in the tier that really counters Kilowattrel. So, mon's got a pretty good amount of free-firing matchups where there's just not a ton that's pivoting around it super safely. You can harken back to the tier shift again where we lost both Hyperior and Magnezone. And hell, even things like Aviary or Uniclus, where those were super consistent checks to it, and now they're just not in the tier. So, I would say this mon keeps getting better too. It helps as well that it's faster than Inteleon, so pretty nice benefit. Gastro Rise, I don't think this mon's incredible, but Inteleon's better, Kilowattrel's better, Hisui type gets more use now. A Gastro Rise is pretty okay, and it learns spikes, so there you go. Grafaiai up to B, literally just reflecting Psychic Terrain as seeing amplified usage, with the male Indeedee now being an NU, and Grafaiai is the best Swords Dance Sweeper in my opinion for Psychic Terrain, so Rise to B is good. Heracross goes up to B as well. I think it could even go higher, but a big thing is that the traditional fighting type checks just don't work versus Heracross. But there's things like Talonflame that can't really threaten you with Flame Body, whether it's Crelia getting murked, literally, like, regardless of if it Terras. Pre-Terra, you get Mega Horned. Terra Steel, you get CC'd. Terra Poison, you still gotta deal with Facade. So there's a lot of bad. Vileplume is trending down, and even that just gets Facaded or Mega Horned. Glowbro gets Facaded or Mega Horned. Shandy has to never lose a 50-50 on whether you're getting knocked on the switch or tanking an immunity move. And even then, Mega Horn is still doing damage, so it's not like you can just always safely switch in. Just a very consistent breaker. Hitmonlee up to B. As I wrote here, this mon sucks. But, hey, Psychic Terrain kind of always uses it, so it's hard to not move it up. I think it sucks, frankly. But whatever. Hisui and Quillfish up to B. Big thing for this mon is that it was just kind of underranked to begin with. If you're looking at the Manual Rain mainstays, it's like Tornadus, Klefki, Basculegion, Hisui, and Quill. And then there's a little bit of versatility on the last two slots. You know how people will pick between Ludicolo and Kingdra typically. People will try to fit a Volt Switch immunity somewhere on there, whether it's like Flygon or Kilowattrel or what have you. But Quill's always on those teams, and so a slight rise to showcase that. Pretty fair. And we do see my Milotic up into B-. I don't think this mon is very good, but as I wrote here, it's kind of like functionally, like how it performs, it's good enough. So even though there's a lot of competition, that it doesn't necessarily stop Milotic from being a bit better than C. Like, status isn't the hugest deal for it, so you don't care about throwing it out versus Talonflame as much as you would with a Swampert. Where Pert doesn't want to burn, Milotic can kind of deal with it because you've got Marvel Skill. You've got Recovery over Pert as well, and since you're Instant Recovery, that's better than something like Vapo, which has to try and Wish and then deal with potentially getting like roared in certain matchups versus like, say, opposing Wish Sylveon, or even if you're in a mirror matchup with another Vapo. You can pivot with this mon too, so that it matches what Pert and sometimes Vapo offer. It's kind of like a jack of all trades mon, where there's at least a couple tangible benefits to it, but not enough to where I would ever say this mon really comes into the meta, unless there's some not even bans, some Pokemon that just rise to RU above it. And then of course, what do we have dropping? So one of the things you'll note here is Talon drops out of S, and as I write, I don't think this is necessarily because Talonflame got a ton worse. I think it got at least marginally worse. We do see the tier adjusting to its presence, and we've seen some of these techs be a thing for a while now, like Terra Steel substitute Flygon. Yeah, that's more of like a Vileplume beater thing, but it still gave Talon a lot of issues, because Talonflame for a long time was happy to run Brave Bird, Roost Defog, one of Will-O-Wisp U-Turn. But now you see things like Terra Steel Flygon, you see things like competitive Kilowattrel, you see things like Agility Gallade, Incineroar is more common, you see even, I feel like there's something else I wanted to mention here. Was there something else? Maybe not. Regardless of all that, a lot more Pokemon now exist that do try and just give Talon issues. Hell, even, the Flare Blitz Talon mentioned from earlier, when I was talking about in the concept like Breloom. It works for Gallade too, because Gallade runs Terra Steel a lot. Maybe that was what I was trying to think of. But this just kind of puts a damper on T-Flame and makes it a little less consistent. And something also that we've talked about in the Indian community is kind of how, like, every time Defog Talonflame is the reason it rises to S, the meta a few months later will revolt against Defog Talon's presence, and a ton of things will pick up steam that exists solely to bother this mon specifically, because it is very exploitable. And then people decide, oh yeah, this mon's not that good anymore. And then it'll usually balance out to be like an A or A+ ranked mon, and we'll feel a lot better then. So it's still a great mon. I think a lot of it just ends up being the meta's adjusted enough to drop it, and Talonflame doesn't really step up to Flygon. Remember the usage stats video. Flygon has twice the usage of Talonflame. And usage is not everything, of course. We have seen plenty of times terrible Pokemon get used in a tier to like the tune of 10+ % usage points or whatever. When it's the top meta mons, you can at least try to glean a little bit more from that. And Flygon as well is just undoubtedly a more threatening, more usable Pokemon than T-Flame. Mienshao drops as well. Big reason is just that this mon locking to CC is no longer as free. So we just want to look down the list. DD Flygon will run Terra Fairy or Terra Ghost with enough frequency to where you don't want to lock into close combat. Gallade, you don't really want to lock into CC and give Gallade a free chance to free fire. Incineroar runs Terra Fairy a lot, so that's not safe. Talon is still really good. Inteleon sometimes runs Terra Ghost. That would be bad to CC into. Monkey Dory quad resists CC and takes it quite well. Glowbro's really good. Pert, if it really wants to, could Terra Fairy. You've got a lot of Wish Passers seeing high usage, like Vaporeon, Sylveon, Umbreon, Screamtail. All of those are fine into Mienshao, because you either have Protect, or you just resist close combat. Shandy, do I want to let Shandy pivot in and get a free turn to throw off an attack? Crest, do I want to let this thing CM up for free? Hell, Plume still, even though it's not at a high point, Plume's still in the meta and it's still good. There's just a lot that really makes life on Xiao hard, and it's still definitely a great Pokemon. Like, it's still one of the freer pivots. It's just not as free as it used to be. Legion drops. Manual Rain. Again, really it's just a matter of, we moved it up to A because we wanted to respect Manual Rain, but it was a little late to have the rise up to A, and so this kind of just adjusts that and says, yeah, the rise probably wasn't needed. Plus, you got Croak and Vapo a lot more common now, and those just pose issues for Basculegion. Still a really good mon, though. Crelia, bit of an overrated mon, but also it's just because the metagame has adjusted so well to its presence that it is pretty hard for it on a game-by-game basis to find those easy matchups, which is, and easy matchups to, of course, Calm Mind and Sweep, which is why you've seen Choice Scarfs probably be the more reliable set, because when you run Moonblast, Trick, Thunderwave, Lunar Dance, literally every game, every turn almost, you can do something, whether it's throw off a Thunderwave, inhibit something with Trick, Lunar Dance up your Sweeper so it can get a second chance. It'll always do something. Calm Mind just deals with too many natural roadblocks, and since the meta still really favors offense a good amount, it's still a bit tedious to say Cress is like that consistent of a sweeper. It'll have matchups where it auto wins still, but it's not as simple as it was in Gen 8. Dragalge drops, a lot of it's that usage of it's just not that high anymore, and so at a point you're like, okay, the mon's an A. We all know it's a good mon, but can we really call it an A rank mon when nobody's using it? Plus, you gotta deal with steel types. There's a lot more steals now that see actual usage. Bronzong returning is a big issue, because Dragalge can't just Focus Blast that. T-Spikes are still not that amazing, because we got a lot of good grounded poisons. And even just things like AV Gallade, Alola Muck, Protect Scouting if you really need it too for the Specs Dragalges. There's a lot more. Umbreon too is a good mention. There's a lot more mons that exist that give Dragalge a lot of natural issue. Now I'll admit, I do like Dragon Tail Dragalge quite a bit. I think there's a lot of mons that try to switch in Dragalge that start getting really upset when you can Dragon Tail spam them around. But that's beside the point. Dragalge drops to A- for now. Sylveon drops, I have no clue why. I think Sylveon has done nothing to justify a drop, but if you want something to talk about, there's a lot of Wish Passers that get used. And Spec Sylveon has to deal with things like Bronzong Rising, and of course, since there's other Wish Passers, it means there's a lot of Protect. That's what I would give you as my reasoning for Sylveon dropping. It's like basically arguing that Vaporeon is the best Wish Passer, and that this is more on par with Umbreon. Plus, saying that like Specs isn't enough to justify it to stay in the ranking of Vapo. I still think this mon's incredible. I'd probably keep it in A, but so be it. Pom Pom drops a lot. I think a big thing is that the taunt sets are just necessary. You can't greed double attack nearly as easily as you used to be able to. Otherwise, you kind of just queue into Umbreon and you die of cringe. Get Toxic, you lose. It's tragic. It doesn't mean it's not still super, super, super scary. And when you run into those grassy terrain teams that give it the defense boost as well, there are some games where it just runs you down. But there's a bit of a reliance on getting all of these boosts. And much like a lot of other bulky setup mons that want to boost up a million times before trying to accomplish their goal of sweeping, you are very vulnerable to being crit. And if you remember the one video I did with Joey where we were trying to do stuff with Pom Pom, we lost multiple games to a very untimely crit. That's just kind of the reality of using a mon like it. Brute Bonnet drops down to B. Big thing is that there's just so many other dark types that people prefer that have a more simple Crelia matchup. I'm not going to say Umbreon does necessarily, but Cress is like super incentivized to immediately Terra to dodge a Toxic. I guess technically you don't have to Terra turn 1 versus Bonnet. You still should because Crunch does a lot, but you will lose your Cress if you don't Terra on the Toxic block. Whereas with Bonnet, I guess you may not lose Cress immediately if you let it crunch you? I don't know, man. Well, that's a big thing. Grass types aren't great. And you have Breloom and Croak seeing a lot more usage. Even, again, Blaze, Pouty, and Tauros seeing more usage. Sucks. And yeah, like I even said, the Crest matchup's awkward because once Crest Terras, there's really not a lot that you can do from there. Umbreon could at least maybe have like T-Wave or Roar and try and claim some positive matchup from that. Like maybe you have something like, again, T-Wave or Roar. That means, okay, Crest Terras, well, you know, trying to block a Toxic doesn't mess you up entirely. Otherwise, Bonnet, what does Bonnet do? Clear Smog, man? Okay, have fun. Florus dropped down to B. A lot of this is just saying Sylveon is better, and there's so much competition that it's hard to keep Florus up in B+. My opinion is that Florus's main niche was that the Slowbro matchup was kind of favorable with just throwing Covert Cloak on. And since you had Synthesis, unlike Sylveon, you didn't necessarily need, you know, lefties as much. So you could get away with running Cloak really easily. I think also the previous meta, the Calm Mind Terra Blast stuff was better. And previous meta just meaning back when Florus was viewed as more of a B+ mon. You had, though, the Calm Mind Terra Blast, Moonblast, or not. The thing is, it even ran Psychic Noise a lot. But Terra Blast was more justifiable if you wanted to try it, right? I was gonna say, yeah, Psychic Noise isn't nearly as good anymore. Because you're not trying to just own Slowbros. So yeah. Infernape drops. This mon's terrible. Nobody uses it. And then there's not a single tournament game that I could point to where Infernape was the reason a player won. It's just, it does not perform, I'm sorry. Meloetta drops. It went from like B-/C rank to like all the way up to B+ with very minimal success anywhere. It was, like I said, a vibes rise. And now I think dropping to B is kind of more reflecting, okay, it probably isn't that good. Now I will say, I think pivot sets are probably not too bad. Y'all even saw my builder. I've got a Meloetta up here. I want to try using this mod again. But, oh, wrong one. But it needs to showcase something first. So yeah, there you go. Plus, yeah, again, Monkey Dory is usually what people want to default to. Rotom Heat drops. It just doesn't see usage. I know there's some people that will stand this mon for till the end of time. Danny is one of them. He thinks this mon's really good. I think Talon dropping off, though, doesn't really help a lot. And then having to run Wisp to not have a deadweight matchup against a ton of common mons. Well, 2 common mons and Gastrodon. But needing to have Wisp, it just hurts what you can do with the mon. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe I just need to try out Wisp, Pivot, Heat Tum. Until then, drops to B. Maybe it can rise back up. It is a ground immunity. And ground immunity is a role that a lot of people always are looking to find new options for. So I'm not going to say that I'm out on this one and that it can't rise back up. I just don't really enjoy its game-by-game impact. Ditto drops, and while Hyper Offense is still really good, since you're seeing more terrain, that means you're seeing more Unburden, and Ditto has a bad Unburden Pokemon matchup since you can't copy that Unburden speed boost. So, as we've seen setup spam HO fall off, Ditto kind of just falls off too. Plus, we are seeing some mons even on those teams that are harder to copy and do stuff to, like Sub DD Flagon being the big one. That's really the only one I could note off the top of my head, but trust me, I'm sure I could name at least one. Yeah, that's literally the point though. Ditto just does not like that terrain is now starting to see the use for Hyper Offense teams that it is. Kingdra drops. I believe Ludicolo is actually B rank right now, so this is a little bit of an incorrect phrasing, but yeah. People like Ludicolo more than Kingdra, generally speaking, since it can be a third range setter, and you generally are needing that third option, even though you're running Life Orb still. It's just nice to have the extra insurance, and so, although I prefer Kingdra, and I think it's just a better breaker, and that Rain only needs 2 setters, and it's usually Klefki and Tornadus. This reflects reality, right? Quag drops, Stall isn't great. Pert's gonna be used on all the other teams. It's kind of just a simple drop. Motum drops as well. Like I talked about Meloetta, I think Rotom Mo's ranking has been based on vibes and little more for a while now. So it drops, kind of just reflecting that grass types as a whole are dropping off. Scrafty drops as well, down to C rank. I think DD Encore, like I talked about here, shout out Shinjineer, me and him built with the DD Encore Scrafty a while ago. I feel like that set could be okay, because, again, we talked about how in this metagame you do like having bulky setup disruption a lot, and Scrafty can do it. The issue is just, otherwise, you're competing with Incineroar, you're competing with Umbreon, you're competing with a Alolan Muck for a team slot, and those are pretty high bars. And then we have a couple unranked. Hariyama to unrank, it probably could stay ranked. I just am not sold on its niche for HO. Smeargle gets unranked. I like it as a web setter, but I'm going to acknowledge, yeah, I mean, Galvantula is usually being used, and technically even you could use a Araquanid probably before you use Smeargle. And in Venusaur's unranked because we've just not seen Manual Sun really at all. I will say maybe Manual Sun is okay, and Venusaur could stay C, but we'll need to see some good tournament viability out of this mon before it gets back on the VR. So that's it. I hope y'all enjoyed, of course. This is what we got now for the VR. Let me know your thoughts down below on this update. Is there anything that you think you would maybe change? You got like a pocket pick that you want to see rise up next update? Or maybe there's a Pokemon that, like me, you're an avid hater of. For example, I'm an avid Registeel hater. I voted this mon to drop to B. And obviously I'm also an avid Raikou hater, and I voted to drop it down to C. I had multiple people vote out to B+, and I'm just like, what Earth do you live on? Not mine. I clearly am on, I must be on Earth too, guys. I do not acknowledge Raikou. No. Thanks all for watching, though, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.